Tucker Carlson, an American journalist, just recently interviewed Vladimir Putin in Moscow. This interview was released on his professional Instagram, Facebook page, and X account about 3 to 4 days ago, on the 8th or 9th of February, I think. The interview is still up. It's about 2 hours long, 7 minutes. Now, when I watched this interview, my interest was to find out how this war, this NATO and Russia proxy war in Ukraine, will affect Africa in the nearest future. It is no doubt that this war has hit a major political and economic blow on every country on this planet, including every single country in Africa. But during this interview, Vladimir Putin didn't really say anything about Africa. But there were some few points that stood out to me. Because during this interview, he said something about having weapons of mass destruction capable of touching everywhere on this planet. Weapons that can counter the anti-missile defense system. Now, this is not a good thing to hear, because if we go back in history, we have seen some few lunatics that have had power and that got up one day and decided that it was their duty to cleanse humanity and went on a rampage, killing millions and millions of people. For example, we saw what Adolf Hitler did around the Second World War. We saw the Holocaust. Even if you did not see it, I mean, there are history books that you can read about the Holocaust. He almost killed 2 million Jews. We also can track back the atrocities King Leopold II committed in Congo DRC. So with this level of power, with such weapons available for these people, just imagine what can happen if we get another lunatic in power. Now, when I relate this back to Africa, Africa is not a continent that poses threat to anybody. We don't have any nuclear weapons, or do we intend to get any? But we don't have any defense systems against this. We need anti-missile defense systems in Africa. We need to be able to protect our people. If not everybody, maybe a few. Because he repeatedly stated, a war, a direct conflict, would bring humanity to the brink of extinction. Bring humanity to the brink of extinction. Let me repeat that again. Those are some powerful words to say. Now, Africa is too vulnerable. Another thing that stood out to me was how relaxed and calm Vladimir was through the entire interview with Tucker Carlson. It is like everything is working out exactly how he planned it. He was very calm, relaxed through that entire interview. And he also mentioned that he is open for negotiations. If this war could potentially lead to the destruction of humanity, could potentially lead to a third world war, then the Western countries, NATO countries, should encourage Ukraine to go sit down with Vladimir and negotiate, since he said he's open for negotiations. This is not that type of war that we can go with. There is no negotiations on the table. No. The whole world has already been terribly affected. Another thing he mentioned during this interview was the power of the dollar and how the power of the dollar is slowly reducing. Now, I am no economic analyst, but he also said there are a lot of economic analysts and political analysts from America that have repeatedly said this. He said the mistake the United States did was start using the dollar as a tool to manipulate countries politically. We have seen this in Africa, in Zimbabwe, during the days of, what was his name, Robert Mugabe. Zimbabwe has been in sanctions for over 20 years because the United States dollar still remains the world reserve currency. It is a currency we use for international trading. Now, if the United States start using this currency as a tool to sanction countries when they don't do the things they want, then sooner or later, you don't need to be a professional. You just need to be a man with common sense. Sooner or later, countries that have been sanctioned will look for other means to trade. And that will definitely reduce the power of the dollar. Now, again, I am not economic analyst. I will leave that to the professionals. But that's something that he said that could potentially affect Africa. These are the points that stood out for me during this interview. There was a lot. It went for 2 hours, 7 minutes, like I said. So when you find time, just go to Tucker Carlson on Instagram, on X, or on Facebook and watch the full episode, also on YouTube. Africa wasn't mentioned. Most of the key players in the world were mentioned during this interview, but Africa wasn't mentioned. And according to Vladimir, he was so knowledgeable about the history of that territory in Ukraine. If you're interested in knowing the history of that area in Ukraine, go watch the interview. He also says some things about how the great Roman Empire ended up failing. It is like he knows there's something coming, something that is inevitable, that he's just waiting for it to happen. So that is everything I have for this from that interview.